It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that felt slow and uneventful for most people on Earth. The sun rose, the cities woke up, and millions of people went about their daily routines. Nobody knew that far above the clouds in the silent darkness of space, something strange was happening, something that would change the future of humanity forever. Inside a quiet control room of an international space watch station, a few researchers were doing what they always did, monitoring the sky. Most days their work was routine, tracking satellites, watching for meteor fragments, and recording harmless cosmic noise. But that morning, one of the screens showed something different. A bright pulse had appeared on the deep space radar. At first it looked like a burst from a dying star or a reflection from space debris, but within minutes the signal began to move. Slowly, precisely, and directly toward the solar system. The technicians stared in disbelief. The data didn't match any known natural object. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't a comet. Its path was too smooth, its speed too steady. Someone or something was controlling it. They sent an alert to higher command. Soon the information spread quietly to several global agencies. Governments began checking and double-checking their instruments. It wasn't long before everyone realized this was real. An object roughly the size of a small city was entering the outer system near Jupiter. In the following hours, secret video conferences took place among scientists and military leaders around the world. They debated whether it was a probe, a derelict spacecraft, or maybe some unknown natural phenomenon. But deep down, everyone felt the same uneasy thought. If this thing was artificial, then something intelligent had built it, while the world below continued to move through its day. Children walking to school, cars filling the roads, news anchors talking about politics and weather. Only a handful of people knew that an unidentified object was approaching Earth. As the hours turned into days, the object adjusted its trajectory. It slowed down, curved around Jupiter's magnetic field, and began heading toward the inner planets. That movement alone proved it wasn't a rock or debris. It was navigating. The agencies in charge of planetary defense went on silent alert. Radar networks were linked. Observatories from several continents focused on the same spot in the sky. Every passing hour brought more data, and every piece of data confirmed the same terrifying truth. This was not an accident of nature. The object's surface reflected very little light, making it hard to see with ordinary telescopes. It emitted faint bursts of energy, almost like signals, patterns but not language. Some thought it might be trying to communicate. Others warned it could be scanning or collecting information. A few scientists suggested sending a friendly broadcast in return, a kind of peaceful hello. But military advisors strongly disagreed. No one knew what or who was inside. For all they knew, announcing Earth's position might be the worst thing they could do. Inside the defense command centers, tension grew. What if it entered orbit? What if it came closer? No one wanted to be the one responsible for making the wrong decision. Days later, as the object passed Mars, it slowed again. Its movement became more deliberate. Then suddenly its direction changed slightly, toward Earth. That single shift triggered the highest security status the planet had seen in decades. Satellites were repositioned. Communication systems were encrypted. The world's most powerful telescopes captured blurry but unmistakable images. A metallic shape, enormous, rotating slowly, reflecting the faint sunlight in brief flashes. Even though all the data was classified, rumors began to spread. A few astronomy enthusiasts who watched deep space noticed strange anomalies and posted them online. Some thought it was just a new asteroid being studied. Others whispered it could be proof of something bigger. Governments quickly denied everything. But within those secure underground rooms behind locked doors, the truth was being studied in detail. The object's structure was too symmetrical to be random. It had repeating patterns like panels or plating. Heat signatures indicated internal energy sources. No comet or rock ever produced that. Then came the next discovery. Using long-range sensors, the scientists detected rhythmic pulses of electromagnetic energy, steady, repeating, almost like a heartbeat. Whatever it was alive in some way, mechanically or biologically. And it was getting closer every day. The quiet fear in those meeting rooms grew into organized preparation. A small circle of leaders decided to treat the situation as a potential first contact event. They formed joint task forces, mixing scientists, linguists, and military specialists. The plan was simple: stay ready, stay hidden, and observe. As the object crossed the moon's orbit, it slowed to a near stop, just hanging in space. Its surface changed color slightly, a shimmer that confused every sensor. No radio signals came from it. No lasers, no noise, nothing but silence. Some experts thought it might be observing Earth. Others feared it was charging energy for something unknown. The public still knew nothing. People continued their lives, scrolling through their phones, watching movies, making plans for the weekend, completely unaware that something enormous was watching them from space. Inside one control room, a small group of technicians couldn't look away from their monitors. Every line of code, every pulse on the radar told them the same thing. The object was waiting. But waiting for what? Finally, one night, a soft tone echoed through the equipment, an energy surge unlike anything seen before. Screens flickered, alarms sounded, and the tracking systems briefly went offline. When they came back, the object had started moving again, this time straight toward Earth. Panic spread through command centers. Emergency calls went out. World leaders were rushed into secure facilities. Every space defense protocol was activated. Even commercial satellites were ordered to shift orbit to prevent collisions. But here was the problem. No one had ever planned for something like this. The systems were designed for asteroids or missiles, not intelligent, moving objects. Within minutes, hundreds of telescopes locked on it. The closer it came, the clearer it became. It was not a single piece of metal. It was a complex structure, like several modules joined together, almost organic in shape. Its outer hull seemed to breathe with faint waves of light. People who saw the first high-resolution images were speechless. They weren't looking at any known human design. This was something entirely new. The military wanted to prepare defensive systems in case it entered the atmosphere. Scientists begged them to wait, to make sure it wasn't a peaceful probe. The debate grew heated. Some said it could be a harmless exploration craft, maybe automated, maybe lost. Others warned that if it meant harm, waiting could cost millions of lives. Hours passed. The world below was asleep, unaware that decisions were being made that could define the fate of the planet. Finally, as the object reached a point just outside Earth's orbit, a faint energy beam extended from it. It wasn't a weapon, at least not immediately. The beam scanned across the atmosphere like a searchlight. Instruments went wild as electromagnetic readings spiked, and then something went wrong. In one of the defense command stations, the beam's reading was misinterpreted as a targeting signal. Automated safety systems calculated it as a possible attack. Before any human could override it, a counter-response triggered. A single missile was launched into orbit. The world's most powerful weapon, designed to intercept foreign threats, shot through the darkness. In a matter of seconds, the missile reached the unidentified object. A flash appeared on the radar. Then silence. All signals from the object vanished. The energy readings dropped to zero. The structure was gone, either destroyed or hidden. For a moment, everyone in the control room just stood there. No one spoke. No one celebrated. The silence felt heavy, unnatural. Had they just saved the planet? Or made the biggest mistake in human history? Over the next few days, space was quiet again. No more signals, no more readings. The official report said it was a malfunctioning satellite that accidentally triggered a false alert. The public never learned the truth, but among those who knew what really happened, an invisible weight hung in the air. Because if the object had been intelligent, if it had truly come in peace, then Earth had just done something irreversible. They had fired first. And somewhere in the endless darkness beyond the stars, if anyone or anything had been watching, they would know exactly what had happened. The message sent to the universe that night was clear. Even without words, humanity had drawn first blood. The world moved on, unaware of what had truly happened out there in the darkness of space. The morning after the explosion, the news talked about regular things: weather reports, market changes, political debates. No one mentioned that something unknown had been destroyed above the planet. No one knew that humanity might have just started something far bigger than it understood. But inside secret facilities, far from public eyes, silence filled every room. The people who had watched the event unfold couldn't forget the image of that object disappearing from their screens. Some of them couldn't even sleep. They kept asking themselves the same question: what if it wasn't a threat? In the days that followed, scientists worked around the clock, analyzing every last bit of data. They replayed the radar logs, the heat readings, the communication patterns. Nothing looked like an attack. The beam of energy that triggered the alert didn't have any weapon signature. It was gentle, consistent, more like a scan. That realization hit everyone hard. The missile had been launched because of a misunderstanding. It wasn't an order. It was an automatic defense system acting too fast. A line of code had decided for the entire planet, but by then it was too late. The sky was quiet again. No signal, no energy, no trace of the massive structure that had been there days ago. It was as if it had never existed. Still, a small group of people refused to accept that it was gone. They believed that whatever intelligence had sent that object might still be watching, maybe even deciding what to do next. So they kept their instruments active, quietly scanning the same coordinates every day. Weeks passed. Nothing. The Earth seemed peaceful again. But beneath that calm surface, tension built quietly among the governments that knew the truth. They held meetings behind closed doors. Words like unknown retaliation, cosmic response, and containment started appearing in classified documents. And yet, even with all the caution, there was also curiosity. For centuries, humans had looked to the stars wondering if they were alone. Now they had a possible answer, and it had come with a mistake. Some scientists wanted to send a message into space. They argued that silence might be taken as fear or even guilt. They wanted to explain, to say it had been an accident. But the leaders said no. The risk was too high. They didn't know who or what they were dealing with, so the message was never sent. Then, almost a month later, something strange began to happen again. Deep space sensors detected a faint signal, very weak, almost like an echo. At first it seemed like background noise, but then it repeated, not once, not twice, but in a pattern. A sequence of pulses. Slow, steady, organized. It came from the same direction where the destroyed object had been. The people monitoring the signal felt a chill run down their spine. It wasn't random static. Someone, or something, was responding. The scientists tried to decode it, but the pattern didn't match any known mathematical or language model. It was too complex, too layered. Some believed it was a message. Others feared it was a warning, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the signal stopped. Silence again. That night, meetings took place all over the world. Military officials, scientists, and analysts debated what it meant. Some wanted to prepare for the worst. Others said they should stay calm, that maybe the signal was harmless. But deep inside, everyone could feel that something had changed. The quiet between the stars didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the silence before a storm. Over the next few days, small technical problems started to appear in space systems. Some satellites stopped responding for a few seconds, then came back online. Communication relays glitched. Power spikes hit observatories across several countries at the same exact time. To the average person, these were just technical faults. But for those who understood what was happening, it felt like someone was testing the planet, like invisible fingers were brushing against the edge of Earth's technology. Learning how everything worked, the world still went on as normal. People laughed, worked, and planned for the weekend. Nobody knew that somewhere far beyond the clouds, something might be watching their every move. Then came the day that everything changed again. It began with a faint shimmer near the edge of the moon. At first, astronomers thought it was a reflection from a passing satellite, but as they zoomed in, the shimmer grew brighter, sharper, and more defined. Within an hour, telescopes across multiple continents confirmed the same thing. Something was emerging from deep space. At first, it looked small, just a bright dot in the darkness, but as the hours passed, the object grew larger. The data showed it was massive, far bigger than the first one. It wasn't drifting randomly either. It was slowing down as it entered the Earth-Moon system. Emergency alerts went out to every major defense command center. Satellites turned their cameras toward it. Within minutes, the image appeared on countless classified screens. What they saw was enough to make even the calmest expert freeze. The object wasn't a single craft. It was several, dozens of smaller shapes moving in formation around a central core. They weren't moving like human-made ships. Their paths curved, twisted, and synchronized perfectly as if they shared a single mind. This time there was no doubt. This was intelligent movement, coordinated, intentional. The previous incident, the destroyed vessel, maybe it hadn't been alone. Maybe others had been watching, waiting for its signal, and when it didn't return, they came looking for it. The mood in every command center turned cold. The mistake from before suddenly felt 100 times heavier. But there was one difference this time. The new arrivals didn't attack. They didn't send signals either. They simply stopped at a safe distance from the planet, holding position near the dark side of the moon. They were watching. For days, they stayed silent. Observatories tracked them constantly. The media began to pick up whispers of unusual space activity, but the real story was still hidden. Inside the scientific teams, the debate reignited. Some wanted to send a message to show peace and honesty. Others believed silence was safer. No one could agree. Then one night, something unexpected happened. The new vessels released a soft light, a glowing wave that spread across the sky like mist. It didn't cause harm. It didn't damage satellites or communication lines. It was gentle, almost beautiful. The sensors showed it wasn't radiation or energy that could hurt life. It was something else, a form of information maybe. When scientists decoded fragments of the wave, they found patterns that repeated the same frequency as the earlier faint signal. It was the same source. Whoever had sent that message weeks ago was now here in person. But what did they want? That question haunted everyone in those tense hours. Some experts believed they were searching for the ship that had vanished. Maybe they were looking for their lost crew. Others feared they were collecting data before deciding what to do next. One thing was certain: humanity was being observed. Every radio transmission, every satellite ping, every movement from Earth was likely being watched. The world leaders, unsure what else to do, ordered full silence from all stations. No one was to send anything toward the sky. They hoped that by staying quiet they wouldn't provoke another misunderstanding. But silence wasn't the same as safety. For several nights, the glowing ships hovered motionless near the moon. Then, one by one, they began to fade, not like something leaving, but as if they were slipping out of visible space itself. When they were gone, the instruments detected nothing. Earth waited. The scientists waited. The world waited. And in that uneasy stillness, something became clear to those few who knew the truth. This was not over. Whatever had come was intelligent, organized, and far more advanced than anyone could imagine. They hadn't attacked. They hadn't communicated. But their silence was more frightening than any weapon could be. It meant they were thinking, deciding, perhaps preparing. And as the weeks passed, the feeling grew stronger, that the first contact humanity had dreamed of for centuries had already happened. But it hadn't been a peaceful handshake between worlds. It had been a misunderstanding, a mistake, and now, somewhere far beyond human reach, a decision was being made about the planet that had fired first. No one knew when or how that decision would reach Earth. But one thing was certain: humanity had been noticed, and whoever had noticed them would never forget. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly rolled into months. The strange objects that had appeared near the moon were gone now. There were no more signals, no lights in the sky, no unexplained readings from deep space. The world seemed normal again. At least that's what everyone was told. People went back to their lives. Children went to school. Families planned vacations. News channels talked about politics, celebrities, and the economy. The world had returned to its ordinary rhythm. But beneath that calm surface, in rooms with locked doors and windows that never opened, a small number of people knew the truth. They were the scientists, soldiers, and researchers who had seen what really happened, and they were certain that this peace was not real. It was silence, the kind of silence that comes before something bigger. Every day, deep space monitors scanned the sky. Thousands of readings were recorded, analyzed, and compared. Nothing unusual showed up. Still, the experts didn't relax. They had all learned one hard lesson: just because something isn't visible doesn't mean it isn't there. In one research facility, a tired technician stared at a monitor late into the night. He'd been watching empty graphs for hours. Every few minutes, he'd check the same coordinates, the same cold patch of space where the alien crafts had last been seen. Nothing. Only the background hum of the universe. He leaned back and sighed. Maybe they really were gone. Maybe Earth had been lucky, but that uneasy question kept returning to everyone's mind. What if they weren't gone? Some believed the visitors were watching quietly, observing humanity from a distance. Others thought they were regrouping somewhere far away but not too far to return. And a few believed that maybe, just maybe, they had decided to leave the humans alone forever. It was impossible to know. Governments around the world kept their space programs under tight control. Every launch was reviewed, every transmission monitored. Nobody wanted to risk another misunderstanding. The official story still said nothing unusual had ever happened. But the truth was that the world's most powerful countries had quietly built a new kind of alliance. One that focused not on fighting each other, but on watching the sky together. The shared goal was simple: be ready if they came back. The alliance wasn't public. The average person had no idea that several nations were now sharing their most secret technology. Satellites were quietly upgraded. Ground radars were linked across continents. New communication codes were written, ones that no civilian would ever see. For the scientists working on the project, it was both exciting and terrifying. They had dreamed of discovering alien life, but not like this, not under the shadow of fear. At the same time, a few people in the group began to ask deeper questions. Why had those visitors come in the first place? If they were truly advanced, what were they looking for near Earth? And if they were peaceful, why hadn't they tried to talk again? No one had answers. The silence made the mystery even heavier. Then one evening, a scientist studying long-range radio frequencies noticed something odd. It wasn't a message, not exactly, but a strange pattern in cosmic radiation. The same wave repeated every 19 minutes. It wasn't strong enough to be natural, yet it wasn't directed toward Earth either. It seemed to move across space like a ripple. When the data was shown to others, they agreed it was unusual, but they couldn't confirm it came from the same beings. Some thought it was a background effect. Others quietly feared it was a sign of preparation, a test signal or a hidden network among those unknown travelers. The report was locked away, marked unverified. But inside the labs, the fear returned. Meanwhile, far away from secret facilities and classified meetings, ordinary life continued. Cities glowed at night. Airplanes filled the sky. Music played on radios. Humanity carried on as it always did. But in small ways, people began to feel something was off. A few amateur astronomers posted strange photos online, faint streaks in the sky, odd flashes of light near the horizon. Most people ignored them, calling them camera errors or satellites. But those who had been part of the secret programs recognized the patterns immediately. They matched the flight paths of the earlier objects. Still, there was no open panic. The information never reached the news. Every incident was quietly erased before the story could spread. But deep down, everyone who knew the truth could sense it. The silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before something else. One scientist described it best during a closed meeting. He said, "It feels like we knocked on a door in the dark, and something on the other side has finally woken up." Those words stayed in everyone's minds. As time passed, the scientific community started noticing small changes around the solar system. Tiny energy fluctuations near the asteroid belt, gravitational distortions too faint to be random. It was as if something invisible was moving through space, carefully, quietly, avoiding detection. Still, no one wanted to declare it officially. Fear of public panic kept every discovery hidden. The official story was that space remained quiet and safe. Behind the scenes, though, military planners worked on new strategies, not for fighting, but for surviving. They created simulation programs, tested communication protocols, and built underground facilities that could hold essential personnel if needed. At the same time, some leaders began to see another side of the story. They realized that humanity had always acted with fear when facing the unknown. Maybe this was a chance to change that. Maybe the silence was a test, to see how humans behaved when faced with uncertainty. So while some prepared for defense, others started projects aimed at understanding. New satellites were launched, equipped with better sensors designed not just to track, but to listen, to truly listen, to whatever might be out there. And in the middle of all this quiet preparation, something unexpected happened. One evening, the night sky over several countries shimmered faintly, almost like northern lights, but these weren't normal lights. They were soft, silver-white, forming shapes that seemed too symmetrical to be natural. They didn't move like clouds or waves. They seemed to breathe. People who saw it described it as beautiful, almost comforting. For a few seconds, the sky looked alive. Then, just as quickly, the lights vanished. The next morning, the reports flooded in. Scientists checked satellite data but found nothing unusual. No radiation spikes, no energy readings, no trace of anything physical. It was like the lights had been a dream. But to those who had seen them, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a sign, a reminder that something out there was still watching. After that, the world slipped into a strange kind of waiting. Every night, astronomers looked to the sky with quiet hope and quiet fear. Every new reading brought a mix of relief and anxiety. The silence stretched on, but the feeling grew stronger. Earth was not alone, and something was happening beyond human understanding. People started noticing changes in themselves, too. The idea of being watched, and even by something unseen, changed how some people lived. Some felt inspired, believing that if someone far away was observing, humanity should show its best side. Others grew uneasy, fearing that every step, every decision, was being silently judged. The truth was that no one really knew. In the hidden halls of the global monitoring network, the experts noticed one last strange thing: the background signals of the universe. The soft cosmic noise that had always been random began to show patterns. Very slow, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But definitely there, the patterns weren't language, but they had rhythm, repetition, meaning. It was as if the silence itself was beginning to whisper. No one could prove it. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. The same way a sailor feels the air change before a storm. And then one day, something happened that none of the experts had predicted. Every major deep space satellite ran from Asia, Europe, and the Americas picked up the same faint signal at the exact same time. It wasn't a sound or a word, but a single pulse of energy. It was short, soft, but powerful enough to reach every corner of the system, and then, just like that, it was gone. No one could trace its source. No one could tell what it meant. But to those who remembered the first incident, the one where humanity had fired by mistake, it felt like an answer. Not a threat, not a warning, but a sign that something, somewhere, had finally turned its attention back toward Earth. The silence that followed was heavier than ever before. No alarms. No explosions. Just that quiet, endless pause before history itself decides to move again. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of human reach, the watchers, whoever they were, seemed to be waiting too, waiting to see what humanity would do next. For months, the strange quiet in space continued. People on Earth lived as if nothing had happened, but for those who knew the truth, every sunrise carried a question. When will they come back? The faint pulse that had been detected earlier still haunted everyone who worked in secret space defense centers. It was small, quick, and harmless on the surface, but deep down everyone felt that it meant something. It wasn't random. It was a reminder, a quiet signal that said, "We haven't forgotten." Scientists kept watching day and night, studying every piece of space data they could collect. Nothing new showed up for weeks. Then slowly, something started to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in small ways that only careful eyes could notice. Space probes beyond Mars began to lose contact, one after another. Not permanently. They would shut down for a few hours, then come back online. The engineers blamed cosmic interference, but those working on classified missions knew better. It looked like someone was testing Earth systems, probing for weaknesses. Then came the second sign. Satellites orbiting near the outer edge of the planet started sending back images with strange distortions, dark, half-visible shapes moving in the background of space. Some of them were large, others small, but all shared one thing in common. They weren't natural. The shapes were always in motion, as if gliding just out of sight. When analysts enhanced the images, they found patterns, geometric, almost mechanical. It was clear, something was back. At first, the world governments tried to stay calm. The public still didn't know the truth, and officials wanted to keep it that way. The last thing they needed was global panic. So they quietly activated the early warning systems, positioned defense satellites, and increased surveillance. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what it meant. Earth was preparing for contact again. As days passed, the unidentified shapes grew bolder. They began to appear closer to the moon's orbit. Radar systems picked up faint readings, dozens, then hundreds of separate signals. It was like a slow, silent arrival. This time it wasn't one large craft. It was many. In one command center, the air was thick with tension. The operators didn't need confirmation from higher authorities to understand what they were seeing. It was a fleet. Still, the scientists pleaded for calm. They argued that no signs of hostility had been detected. Perhaps it was a return for investigation, maybe even communication. But the military officials couldn't take that chance. The memory of the first incident, the accidental missile, still haunted them. They couldn't afford another mistake, but they also couldn't appear unprepared. So defense systems were quietly placed on standby. Outside, the world continued as normal. People looked up at the same old moon, unaware that strange objects now drifted behind it. Then, without any warning, something changed. Global communications began to flicker. Internet connections dropped for seconds at a time, then returned. GPS signals became unstable. Airplanes were forced to land as navigation systems glitched across continents. At first, experts blamed solar storms. But within hours it became clear. The disturbances were too precise, too controlled. Whatever was out there wasn't attacking, but it was testing how Earth would react. Across the globe, emergency meetings began. Some wanted to broadcast a peaceful message. Others demanded immediate military readiness. The debate grew tense, divided between hope and fear. And while humans argued among themselves, something happened high above. The sky itself changed. Late one evening, several astronauts aboard an orbiting station sent down a message. They had seen something unbelievable. A formation of faint glowing lines stretching across the darkness, moving together like a living grid. At first, the lines seemed harmless. But soon, sensors detected an invisible field spreading through low orbit. It wasn't destructive, but it blocked many signals. Earth was slowly being surrounded, not with weapons, but with silence. For the scientists below, that was the most chilling part. The visitors weren't firing or shouting. They were simply isolating the planet, cutting it off piece by piece. Within a day, several communication satellites went completely dark. Ground teams couldn't reach them. The same pattern appeared everywhere: quiet, efficient, unstoppable. In the middle of all this confusion, a surprising thing happened. Humanity, which had spent centuries divided by borders and politics, began to unite. For the first time, countries shared data openly. Scientists worked together without competition, and people stopped arguing about who was right. The whole world was facing the same mystery. That was when a small group of engineers came up with an idea. Instead of waiting to be completely surrounded, they decided to send a simple message into the void, one that couldn't be misread, one made not of words, but of sound. The message was only a series of soft musical tones repeating 3 times. It carried no threat, no demand, just a symbol of peace. The idea was to remind whoever was out there that humans were capable of reason and regret. When the transmission was sent, the world waited. For hours, nothing happened. The signal went into the silence and vanished. Then, just before dawn, every radar in orbit picked up a pulse, a brief reflection coming from the direction of the unknown objects. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an attack. It was an echo, the same musical tones, but reversed. Someone had answered. That moment changed everything. The people in the control rooms felt a mixture of relief and fear. The visitors had responded, which meant they were listening. But no one knew what that reply really meant. Was it agreement, understanding, or something else? The next day, the faint lights near the moon began to move again, slowly, almost rhythmically. Satellites tracked them, forming a new pattern, one that no one could decode. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Then, one of the objects broke formation and began descending toward Earth's upper atmosphere. It didn't fall like debris. It moved with control, with purpose. Panic swept through the command centers. Should they intercept it? Should they let it come? Every second felt like a lifetime, but the object stopped, high above the clouds, just floating, glowing faintly against the stars. The glow grew brighter, then spread out like ripples in water. Every radio, every receiver, every broadcast channel across the world suddenly picked up the same sound. A low hum, soft and harmonic, like a voice trying to speak through static. People everywhere froze. Radios in cars, TVs in homes, phones in pockets, all played the same tone at the same time. For 30 long seconds it continued, then silence returned. No words, no images. Just that single shared moment. It was the first time the entire planet had experienced something together. Not as nations, not as enemies, but as one species. That night, millions of people went outside and looked up at the sky. There was nothing visible to the naked eye, but deep inside, humanity knew that the Watchers were still there, and that the conversation had just begun. In the days that followed, strange things began happening again. Power grids flickered without reason. Ocean sensors detected unknown vibrations. A few deep-sea microphones even recorded faint rhythmic sounds from the depths, almost like echoes coming from under the planet itself. Some scientists believed it was a side effect of the earlier signal. Others whispered theories that perhaps the visitors weren't just above Earth. Maybe they were already here, studying quietly, hidden in plain sight. No one could prove it. No one could deny it either. Amid the growing uncertainty, one thing became clear. Humanity was not being ignored anymore. It was being tested, not for strength or weapons, but for how it behaved under pressure. And slowly, humanity began to change. People grew kinder. Nations stopped threatening each other as often. There was a strange sense of unity that hadn't existed before. But the silence from space never truly ended. The objects still floated out there watching, waiting, doing things no one could understand. It became clear to those who studied the patterns that the visitors weren't preparing for an attack. They were observing reactions. Studying fear, cooperation, anger, and hope. It was as if they were measuring humanity's heart. Then one night, the faint hum returned, softer, warmer this time. And as quickly as it appeared, it faded again. The world didn't panic anymore. People simply listened. Somewhere far beyond the stars, the Watchers must have seen that change, that small but powerful human ability to adapt, to find peace even in uncertainty. And while no one could say what would happen next, everyone knew that this was not the end. The visitors had shown their power. Humanity had shown its heart. The silence was gone now. In its place was something new, a fragile connection. But even the most hopeful minds couldn't ignore one lingering thought that haunted them all. When something so advanced chooses to make contact, it's never by accident, and if they had truly come in peace, then why were there now hundreds of them waiting quietly beyond the moon, never moving, never leaving, as if they were still deciding what to do next? The world had survived the silence, but what came after might be even more important. The moment when humanity would finally discover what those visitors really wanted. The world had grown used to living under a quiet sky. People no longer panicked when the nightlights flickered or when strange readings came from space. They had learned to accept the Watchers, those distant, glowing forms that stayed beyond the moon, unmoving yet never gone. But something inside humanity had changed. The fear that once controlled them had turned into curiosity. People began to ask deeper questions. Why were they here? What were they waiting for? Were they protecting us, testing us, or judging us? No one knew the answers, yet the silence felt heavier than ever. Then one morning, an unexpected discovery shook the world again. A small unmanned probe, one that had been lost for months, suddenly sent back a signal. It was weak, damaged, and full of static, but scientists managed to recover fragments of its recording. What they found left everyone speechless. The probe had captured a video, short and grainy, but clear enough to see something extraordinary. A massive object shaped almost like a moving city had been floating deep in space, surrounded by smaller crafts. And on the surface of that colossal structure were markings, symbols that no one could read, yet they looked almost biological, as if the ship itself was alive. When the news leaked, the world was stunned. The Watchers weren't just mechanical beings. They were something more, something alive in ways humans couldn't understand. Governments tried to keep calm, but behind closed doors they knew this changed everything. For decades, humans had believed life beyond Earth would be either simple or friendly, but this discovery reminded them of a truth they had long ignored. The universe doesn't owe humanity kindness. A special council was formed, made up of scientists, philosophers, and a few leaders known for their level-headedness. Their task was simple but impossible: to understand what the visitors wanted. Days turned into weeks as the council studied every pattern, every hum, every light from the sky. One night, a scientist noticed something strange. The glowing formations around the moon were changing shape again. But this time they weren't random. They were forming a recognizable pattern, a spiral expanding outward. The pattern repeated itself 3 times, then stopped. When the data was analyzed, the meaning was still unclear. But one thing stood out: the timing. The pattern appeared exactly 24 hours after Earth's last attempt to send a peaceful message. It was a reply. For the first time, people dared to hope that true communication was possible. So, humanity decided to answer again. Not with sound or music this time, but with images. Using advanced technology, they created a sequence of light signals that told the story of Earth. Its oceans, its animals, its people, its mistakes, and its dreams. The signal was sent toward the watchers, broadcasted into the silent dark, and once again the world waited. Hours passed. Then a day. Then another. Nothing happened. But on the 3rd night, the moon itself began to glow faintly blue, not from reflection but from within. It was as if something behind it had awakened. The light pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. People all over the world went outside to watch. Some prayed. Some cried. Others simply stood in silence, feeling the weight of history pressing on their hearts. Then, without warning, the pulse stopped. The light faded. The sky went back to normal. For a moment, it felt as if it was over, as if the visitors had decided to end the contact. But just before sunrise, telescopes picked up movement again. This time, one of the smaller crafts detached from the formation and began descending toward Earth's atmosphere. It was the same as before, smooth, controlled, almost graceful. But this time it didn't stop high above the clouds. It came lower. The entire world watched through live satellite feeds as the craft slowed down and hovered above the Pacific Ocean. Waves below it shimmered with strange colors, as if reacting to its presence. No sound came from it. No message. It just stayed there silent for hours. Then something unexpected happened. Every radio and frequency across the planet suddenly went quiet, as if muted by an invisible hand. And in that deep silence, a voice was heard. It wasn't loud, nor did it come from one place. It echoed everywhere at once, calm, soft, and perfectly clear. It said only 3 words: "Do you understand?" The voice wasn't human, but it wasn't mechanical either. It felt alive, gentle yet powerful, carrying a tone that touched something deep within every listener. Those 3 words caused more debate than anything in history. Some believed it was a sign of peace, others thought it was a warning. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: the watchers were asking something serious. The message repeated twice more, and then the craft rose slowly back into the sky. Within minutes, it disappeared into the dark, joining the others near the moon. That night, sleepless meetings filled every corner of the planet. What did "do you understand" mean? Was it about the earlier attack, the signals, or something deeper? Something about humanity itself? Days passed with no further communication. But then reports began coming in from across the world. People claiming to have seen strange lights in remote places, hovering silently over forests, oceans, and deserts. Scientists confirmed that small, energy-based objects were appearing near certain regions. They didn't harm anything. They didn't interfere. They simply observed. At first, fear spread again. But as the days went by and no damage occurred, the fear turned into curiosity. People started calling these objects the mirrors, because they only reflected light and sound, never producing anything themselves. It was as if the watchers were showing humans their own image, silently, watching how they behaved, how they responded, how they treated one another under pressure. And that's when something even more surprising happened. Across countries that had been enemies for years, leaders began to talk. Agreements that had been impossible before were suddenly signed. Aid was shared, borders softened, and the world became quieter. Not because everyone trusted the visitors, but because deep down, humanity had realized something. If they wanted to survive this unknown, they couldn't afford to fight each other anymore. The unity wasn't perfect, but it was real. People began helping strangers more. News channels stopped showing endless conflict and started focusing on cooperation. It was a small shift, but it felt like hope. Meanwhile, the watchers remained silent, still patient, observing from above. One evening, something remarkable happened in a small coastal city. The mirror that had been hovering nearby suddenly descended close to the water. It shimmered brightly, and for a moment it projected faint images into the mist. Not of stars or ships, but of human faces. Faces of people smiling, crying, and laughing. It was as if the watchers were showing humans their own emotions, reminding them of what made them different from everything else in the galaxy. That small event spread around the world within hours. People everywhere felt something shift inside them. Maybe, just maybe, the watchers weren't here to destroy or conquer. Maybe they were testing if humanity could rise above its own chaos. But as the world began to relax, a small group of defense officials grew uneasy. They believed this calm was only temporary, that the watchers were studying humans to find weaknesses. And they weren't alone. A few powerful nations secretly restarted weapon development programs just in case. They told no one. They justified it as a safety measure. Yet somehow the watchers seemed to know. Within days, those secret facilities began to experience strange malfunctions. Power outages, equipment failures, and even spontaneous shutdowns. No harm was done, but the message was clear. They were watching everything, and that's when the truth started to sink in. The visitors weren't only testing human emotions, they were testing discipline, restraint, and trust. How humanity reacted now would decide everything that came next. If they could stay united, show understanding, and resist the old habits of fear and violence, maybe the watchers would see them as worthy allies. But if they turned on each other again, the outcome could be very different. As days turned into nights and the strange lights continued to shimmer in the sky, one thing became clear: the next move would decide humanity's future, not the watchers, theirs. And so, under that vast silent sky, Earth held its breath. The world didn't know it yet, but the next event, the one that would change everything forever, was already on its way. The world had been living under the same quiet sky for many months. The watchers still hovered far beyond the moon, their glowing shapes sometimes visible to powerful telescopes but never moving closer. Humanity had learned to live with them, like distant neighbors no one truly knew. Yet even in silence, everyone felt it. Something was coming. Every night the sky seemed to whisper a little louder. The air itself carried a strange kind of tension, like the moment before a storm. No one could say why they felt it, but people everywhere sensed that the waiting was almost over. Then, one morning, something extraordinary happened. The lights beyond the moon suddenly shifted. What had stayed still for months now moved together in perfect formation. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, organized, almost ceremonial. In every corner of the planet, scientists rushed to confirm what they were seeing. The watchers were forming a circle, not a battle pattern, something else, something almost beautiful. The formation pulsed once, then again, creating waves of light that rippled through the darkness of space. The waves didn't harm anything. They simply spread outward, touching satellites and communication networks with harmless static. But within that static was a pattern, a message. When decoded, the message wasn't words or numbers. It was coordinates, a single location on Earth, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Within hours, the world's focus turned to that spot, an empty stretch of ocean with no islands, no ships, and no reason to matter. Yet it was where everything was about to happen. Satellites zoomed in. Naval ships changed course. Scientists prepared to record everything. No one knew what to expect, a landing, a contact, or something worse. For days, nothing happened. The coordinates remained quiet, untouched by storms or waves. But then, one calm evening, something began to rise from beneath the water. At first, it looked like a shadow, a dark shape pushing up from the depths. Then the ocean started glowing faintly blue, the same color that had once lit up the moon. Slowly, a massive structure emerged. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It looked alive, smooth, flowing, like something grown rather than built. The water around it shimmered, but the surface of the object remained perfectly still. No sound. No movement. Just silence and light. Across the world, every screen, every broadcast, every camera turned toward that glowing shape. Billions of people watched in real time, holding their breath. Then the light pulsed once more, not bright but gentle, like a heartbeat. And for the first time, a clear voice filled the airwaves. It wasn't deep or robotic. It sounded calm, almost human, but carried an echo that no human voice could make. It said, "You have learned to listen." Those words spread across the world instantly. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone listened. The voice continued, steady and patient. "You have shown fear. You have shown anger. You have shown regret. And now, you begin to understand." People cried. Others fell silent. It wasn't a threat. It was something else. Something that sounded almost like forgiveness. The voice continued again. "We came not to destroy, but to know. Your kind reached beyond your home before you were ready. You reached with fire instead of light. We watched, not to end you, but to see if you could rise above yourselves." The words touched everyone who heard them. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about control. It was about understanding. For centuries, humanity had looked to the stars searching for life, never imagining that when life finally looked back, it would ask not about technology or strength, but about compassion. The voice went on, softer now. "We feared you once. You are small, yet you carry great destruction inside you. But in your weakness we have seen something we did not expect, the power to change." The glowing structure began to pulse faster, like breathing. The ocean reflected the light like glass. The watchers in orbit slowly moved closer, forming a soft ring above Earth, surrounding the planet in quiet brilliance. For the first time in recorded history, night turned to day without the sun. The voice spoke again. "The test is over." Those words sent chills across the world. People looked to one another, wondering what that meant. Was it good or bad? Would they stay? Would they leave? But the tone wasn't cold. It was calm. "You are not perfect," the voice said, "but you are not lost. The path ahead will not be easy, yet now you walk it together." Then slowly, the light began to fade. The massive structure that had risen from the ocean started sinking back beneath the waves, disappearing into the deep, leaving only ripples behind. The watchers above the moon started moving again, not toward Earth, but away from it. Within hours, the skies were empty. The lights that had once terrified the galaxy were gone. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful. All over the world, people gathered in the streets, looking up, waiting for another sign. There was none. The sky was just the sky again, black, endless, familiar. But everyone knew it would never feel the same. The visitors hadn't come for war. They hadn't come for conquest. They came to remind humanity of something it had almost forgotten, that survival isn't about strength alone. It's about understanding, compassion, and the will to change. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Countries that had been rivals for decades began to cooperate. Space programs joined forces. Scientists who had once competed started working side by side. A new project was announced. Not a weapon, not a defense system, but a ship. A vessel built not for battle, but for exploration. Its mission, to find where the Watchers came from, not with fear, but with curiosity and respect. People everywhere felt hope again, a kind of hope that didn't depend on victory but on connection. Yet, in quiet corners of the world, a few people wondered, were the Watchers really gone? Sometimes, when the night sky was perfectly clear, faint blue ripples could still be seen near the moon. They didn't move or flash, they just shimmered softly, like the heartbeat of something watching from far away. Some said it was just light reflecting off dust. Others whispered that it was their way of saying, "We're still here." Months passed and humanity slowly returned to normal life. But deep inside, everyone felt different. People looked at the stars not with fear anymore, but with a sense of belonging. They had faced something vast, something beyond their understanding. And instead of falling apart, they had found unity. The message the Watchers left behind wasn't written in stone or carved in monuments. It was written in people's hearts. A reminder that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't fire or metal, it's the choice to care. Years later, when the new exploration vessel was finally ready, the world gathered to watch its launch. The ship lifted into the sky on a bright morning, leaving behind trails of light that looked almost like those that had once surrounded Earth. People watched in silence, smiling, knowing that this time humanity wasn't going out to conquer. They were going out to say hello. As the ship rose higher, the signal from the command center came through. "We are on course." And the stars are waiting. The crowd erupted in cheers. But high above, in the deep black of space, just for a brief moment, the faint blue glow returned near the moon. One last pulse, like a gentle farewell. It was as if the watchers were smiling, silently watching humanity take its first true step. Not as conquerors, not as survivors, but as learners. And though they had left no trace, no name and no promise to return, everyone on Earth knew one thing for certain. They hadn't declared war against the most deadly species alive. They had taught it how to live.